The school emptied the way a sea pulls back from shore at dusk, a long, slow retreat of voices and footsteps and laughter that did not belong to David. He waited with his cart near the double doors until the last sneakers squeaked past and the final locker slammed shut and the echo faded into the rafters. Only then did he push the cart out, the wheels complaining in a rhythm he knew by heart, the mop buckets sloshing a small gray tide. The hallway smelled like pencil shavings and old, gum, and a trace of the cafeteria's soup that would never quite leave the tiles. He breathed it in because this was where his hours lived. This was where he could move without being jostled, where no one was watching except the walls and the fluorescent lights humming like tired bees. He started with the trophy case because that was how he always began. The glass held fingerprints, from small victories and big ones, smudges from faces pressed close to see names. He wiped them with a calm, slow motion, looking past his own faint reflection to the brass plates that said things like regional champions and outstanding scholar, and most improved. He read the names the way a man reads a list of strangers in a phone book, curious and far away. Once, years ago, his name had been on a list, not a trophy, just a shift schedule for the car plant where he had tightened bolts and earned enough to bring home flowers every other Friday. He still remembered the weight of the bouquet wrapped in brown paper, the smile that rose on his wife's face like the moon when he walked through the door. After the plant cut shifts and then cut workers and then closed, he learned the weight of a mop and a different kind of schedule, one that no one applauded. Students passed him in clusters during the last late club meetings, the debate team with their folders, the basketball boys tossing a ball down the hall even though the sign said no, the theater kids practicing lines in loud pretend voices. A few nodded to him because nodding cost nothing and earned a tiny feeling of goodness. Others did not see him at all, walking through the space he cleared as if the floor cleaned itself. A pair of seniors sauntered past wearing jackets with letters that told the school who they were. One of them lifted his phone and pretended to narrate a nature documentary in a whisper, pitched not to be kind, but to be heard. The janitor in his natural habitat, sweeping away his hopes and dreams. And they laughed, not because the line was clever, but because it made them feel higher. David lowered his eyes and kept moving the broom, catching crumbs and paper curls and a pink plastic bead that had rolled from someone's bracelet. The bead clicked against the dustpan like a small marble. He held it up to the light, then dropped it in his pocket because letting something pretty go to the trash felt wrong tonight. He turned a corner near the faculty lounge and paused because voices came through the door, not muffled, not trying to be quiet. He did not stand there to listen. He stood because his cart had bumped the doorstop and stuck, and while he fussed with the front wheel, the words came anyway. Someone laughed and said he was still here, the night ghost, and someone else asked how long the board would keep a man like that when the budget kept shrinking. Another voice, a woman's, sighed and said, maybe he stayed because the school was the only place that looked at him. A man answered that the place didn't look at him either. That was the point. He was furniture on wheels, point him at the spill and watch it vanish. The laughter that followed had an easy roundness, the kind that did not check for doors or thin walls or ears that might bleed. David coaxed the wheel free and pushed off without making a sound on purpose, not because he was ashamed, though shame flickered as always, but because sound would pull the eyes, and he had nothing he wanted them to see. He took the long hall toward the music rooms because they were quiet after dark, and the dust there fell politely. He liked how instruments slept in their cases like dogs in a row, patient and sure their owners would return. On a small corkboard, near the door, a recital poster from last spring still clung with 2 pins, the top corners curled. Someone had drawn stars with a silver marker around a name in the second column. He imagined the parent who had stood on tiptoe to add them too. Excited to be subtle, then he moved on because imagining other people's happiness too long felt like holding a warm dish with bare hands. The storage closet by the band room held extra chairs. A ladder with a wobble he had fixed with tape, boxes labeled cables and stands, and winter programs. He flicked on the bulb that always took a breath before it came to life and stepped into the crowded little cave. This closet was his favorite because it had a smell of cardboard and pine cleaner that reminded him of December nights when he and his wife had strung lights on a tree small enough to sit on a table so the heat bill would not cry. He lifted a box to get to the shelf where the dust settled in a thick fur. He wiped it clean with a rag and watched the wipe leave a path like a boat makes through a lake. On the top shelf, behind a fallen poster roll and a stack of foam music, note props from some forgotten show, he saw a corner of something that did not belong, a faded shoebox lid with a bit of twine around it. He reached up, steadied himself on the shelf's edge, and pulled the box forward with care. It scraped and shed a little dust cloud that made him cough. He set it on the floor and crouched, the knees of his work pants creasing along the old lines, and untied the twine. Inside lay a handful of program booklets, a broken metronome with one brass foot missing, and beneath those, wrapped in tissue paper that time had turned from white to tea, a single envelope sealed in wax. He did not breathe for a second because the sight of wax on paper is like seeing a door in the middle of a field, old and unnecessary, and yet somehow more real than the field itself. The wax was cracked, but still held the edges closed. The name on the front was written in blue ink, the shade of lake water, in handwriting he knew from places ink should not survive. The back of an old recipe card, the inside of a book where a date had been inscribed, the label on a jar that once held coins for a trip they never took. The name was his, David. His own name can sound loud when it arrives from the past. He sat back and put the envelope on his knee and felt his leg tremble. His first thought was that someone was playing a trick. His second thought was that someone had found one of her notes from years ago and thought it romantic to leave it where he would find it. His third thought had no shape. It was only a feeling of being watched by love across a long hallway of time. He turned the envelope over, touched the wax with his thumb, and then lifted it quick because the wax was cool, but his skin felt burned. He closed the lid of the box and leaned against it and let his head rest back against the shelf. The bulb above hummed. The hallway outside was quiet, the way a field is quiet after snow. He looked at the envelope again to be sure. The blue ink had not faded so much that he could not see the little heart shape that always formed where her letters curved and kissed. Not on purpose, just the way her hand had moved. 10 years is a long time for anything to wait. He wanted to open it. His fingers had already found the corner where the wax had a tiny fault like a river crack. He wanted to tear it and pull the page free and drink the words like water. He wanted to run home with it in his pocket and lay it on the table and circle it with his arms and whisper, "You waited for me, you stubborn thing." But something in him said no. Not under this light. Not on this floor with the mop leaning like a guard. He stood up, slid the envelope inside his shirt, where the heat of his skin could keep it company, and put the box back just as he had found it, with the twine loose around the lid in case the future needed another small miracle. He finished the hallway slower than usual because the inside of his chest had changed its weather. He emptied garbage in the math wing and found a crumpled quiz with a big red A and felt a flash of pride for a child he did not know. He cleaned a bathroom mirror and watched his face move behind the streaks he erased. The lines at the corner of his mouth deeper than last year. The eyes that looked like his father's had at 50, surprised to still be here. He found a sweater, left on a chair in the library, and folded it and placed it on the lost and found shelf with a softness meant for the shoulders that would miss it. He pushed the cart back to the custodial room and rolled the mop out to rinse it under the spigot. The water ran brown and then gray and then clear. He wrung the mop hard, set it to drip, and turned off the light. He locked the door not because anyone longed to steal a broom, but because keys give a man a small square of quiet he can close. He nodded to the night guard, who always said good evening with the same even tone, and stepped into the air that had cooled enough to smell like metal and pine. The walk home took 9 minutes if he did not stop at the corner store, and 11 if he did. He stopped because the store clerk liked to ask about nothing, about the weather, about the game, about whether the bus was running late again, and that kind of talk kept the dark from chewing at the edges. He bought bread and a can of soup and the little carton of milk that never tasted like childhood but pretended. The clerk rang him up and said nothing more than "take care tonight," and he said "you too," and they both meant it. His apartment sat above a closed barber shop with a striped pole that never turned anymore. The stairs were narrow and soft in the middle from decades of feet. He opened. His door and the smell of old carpet and his own soap greeted him. He set the bread on the counter, the soup on the shelf, the milk in the fridge that grumbled. He stood very still and listened to the small hums of the room. The clock ticked that missed one beat every minute like a child who skips a square in hopscotch. Then he pulled the envelope from his shirt and held it with both hands. He sat at the table where a ring of sunlight had bleached the wood over years of mornings. He laid the envelope in the ring as if the old light could bless it. The wax seal had a scratch through the middle where time had worried it. He touched the curve of her D and the loop of her A and felt the world tilt. Grief is not a single thing. It is strata, layers pressed by years and weather, and some nights a man can walk across it as if it were rock, and some nights it opens like old ice, and he is in cold water from one breath to the next. He steadied himself by laying one palm flat on the table and counting the grooves in the wood. He did not open it. He told himself he would wait until morning because morning carries a different kind of courage. He put the envelope back in the pocket of the jacket hanging over the chair, then took it out again and placed it beneath the sugar jar because sugar had been her friend and because keeping it near something sweet felt right. He made the soup and ate it too fast and did not taste it. He washed the bowl and left it to dry. He made his bed because she had always said a made bed gives the day a straight backbone. He turned off the lamp and lay down and stared at the ceiling where a crack wandered like a small river from the light fixture to the corner. He closed his eyes and did not sleep. When he slept, it was morning already, and the light through the thin curtain was the color of his mother's old apron. He woke with the feel of paper against his palm, though his hand was empty. He sat up and remembered and went to the table and lifted the sugar jar, and there it was, patient, intact, a little warmer from the night. He poured himself tea and did not drink it. He sat. He broke the seal with his thumbnail, and because he was a careful man, slid the letter out along the edge so the paper would not tear. He unfolded it once and then again because she had folded it the way she folded shirts, neat corners, aligned. He saw her handwriting rise in gentle loops and fall in small valleys, and he could have stopped there and been satisfied just to see that motion again on paper. But the words pulled. "My David," it began, and the room filled with her voice. Because the mind saves what the ear cannot bear to lose. If you have found this, then the small plan I made with Mrs. Lake has worked, and I am grateful to her and to the quiet places in this building that keep secrets. I did not want to leave you with only empty drawers. I wanted to leave you with a path. He read slowly, lips moving because saying the words helped hold them in the air longer. She wrote of afternoons when she had waited in the staff room after her volunteer shift, of how she had arranged the box with the metronome and the programs and had asked the music teacher to look the other way. She wrote of the day the doctor had said the word that turns air into glue, and how she had come to this very closet and cried into the sleeve of her sweater and then laughed at herself because crying in a room full of unused chairs felt silly and yet perfect. She wrote that she had left more than a letter, that somewhere in the school there was a small thing he was meant to find when he was ready, a thing that needed a key, and that the key would be where music rests when it is out of breath. He put the letter down. His hands had begun to shake, not from fear, but from the feeling a man has when the horizon pulls closer. He looked at the line again, where music rests when it is out of breath, and he tried to see the room she had seen. The instruments sleeping, the corners where dust sits thicker because no one bothers them. He thought of vents with covers and piano benches with drawers and the old cabinet in the stage wing that no one could open because the lock had rusted its tongue in place. He thought of her smile when she made a puzzle for him the way she had. Said, "Let's leave a trail for your birthday once," and led him from a cup on the kitchen counter to a note under the sugar to a scarf in the hall to a small wrapped book behind the plant that had needed water. He folded the paper along the old creases and slipped it back into the envelope and placed both in his shirt again because that pocket had become a home. He drank the now cold tea and did not taste it and did not care. He laced his boots even though he did not need to be at the school for another hour. He buttoned his jacket and stood for a moment in the doorway of his small room and looked at the bed made neat and the sink clean and the small picture on the dresser of two people younger than they knew, and said out loud, "I will find it." And the room held the promise the way the old house on the hill had once held his footsteps when he was small. He walked to the school before the sun had fully cleared the roofs. The flag in front of the office hung at its rope like a tired arm. He used his key on the side door because he had earned the right to open this building when others were still asleep. The lights popped awake in sequence as he flipped switches. He went straight to the music wing with his cart abandoned by the door like a friend who would wait. He stood in the band room and listened to the hum of the vents and the way the silence echoes in a space made for sound. And then he knelt by the lowest vent, the one behind the second row of chairs where students always tangled their feet. He unscrewed the grill with the coin he kept in his pocket for stuck screws, the coin that had lived through all kinds of pockets, and set the grill aside. Inside lay dust that might have been as old as a song no one sings anymore, and in that dust, a little shape wrapped in cloth the color of rain. He reached in and pulled it out and sat on the floor with his legs crossed the way he had not sat since he was in school himself. He unwrapped the cloth and found a small metal key, ordinary as a house but shining where the cloth had protected it from time. A small tag was tied to it with thread, and the tag had two words in her ink, for later he held the key. The weight of it was not much, but it rearranged the weight of everything else. The long nights and the laughter that slid off him like sleet, the dinners alone, and the words he had swallowed so they would not break in the room. He closed his hand around it and felt its teeth press the lines of his palm. He stood slowly, knees protesting, and put the key in the small pocket inside his jacket, where things that matter do not fall. He looked around the room and smiled because she had chosen a place where music rests when it is out of breath, and because he had understood, and because somewhere else a lock was waiting to meet the teeth that would fit it and turn and open. He put the grill back and tightened the screws and wiped the floor where his knees had printed dust. He picked up his cart and began his rounds with a step that was the same to anyone watching and completely different to him. He hummed a tune to himself without meaning to, something that had no name yet, and the sound moved through the hallway like a thin, bright ribbon that knew which doors it meant to tie shut and which it meant to open. The key burned like a coal in David's pocket all night. He finished his shift with the same mop, the same trash bags, the same fluorescent lights buzzing above, yet everything felt different. Every time his hand brushed the small lump inside his jacket, he felt her voice again, her handwriting alive in his mind, the words for later circling him like a ghost that refused to fade. He tried to keep his head down as he wheeled his cart through the halls, but the students didn't make it easy. A boy in a Letterman jacket kicked over a soda can in front of him and laughed when David bent to pick it up. Two girls whispered and giggled, glancing at him as though he were a joke. Walking on two legs, he heard it all, but tonight it slid over him differently. Their cruelty stung, yes, but beneath the sting was the warmth of that key. They did not know what he carried. They did not know that in his pocket was proof that his wife had thought of him until her last breath, proof that she had left him, something more than grief. Still, he didn't know what. When his shift ended, he walked home through the quiet streets. The barber shop's striped pole still stood stiff and silent, its paint peeling. Upstairs, his apartment waited, small, plain, but steady. He closed the door, hung his jacket, and pulled out the key. He set it on the table. The lamplight gleamed against its teeth. He stared at it for a long time, his fingers twitching. He wanted to know. He wanted to run back to the school, try every lock in the basement, every cabinet in the attic, every door that had rusted shut. But fear held him back. What if the lock no longer existed? What if the chest inside was empty? What if it was nothing at all? He pushed the key aside, reached for the envelope again, and read her letter for the 100th time. Where music rests when it is out of breath. He traced her handwriting with his fingertip, the loops and curls, the little heart shape. She always left when she wrote his name. His throat tightened. 10 years since he had heard her voice. 10 years since her laughter had filled their kitchen. And yet here she was, reaching across time. He laid the letter flat on the table, smoothed its creases, and whispered, "What? Did you leave me?" The question gnawed at him through the night. He tried soup, but could not taste it. He tried sleep, but lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His wife had always written in notebooks and on scraps of paper, in margins of recipes and calendars. She believed writing kept memories alive. He lifted the first one carefully. Her handwriting filled the pages in loops and lines, alive and familiar, as though she had only set the pen down yesterday. On the first page, she had written, "My David, these pages are for you. If you are reading this, it means time has carried you here at last. Do not rush. Do not be afraid. Each page is a step. Each word is my hand in yours." Tears blurred his eyes. His rough fingertips traced the ink. He wanted to read every page right. There, devour her voice whole, but something heavier waited beneath the journals. He set the notebooks aside, heart trembling, and found a smaller parcel wrapped in cloth. He untied the string, unfolded the cloth, and revealed a second key. This one was different from the first, longer, heavier, its teeth sharper and more ornate. It did not look like a key to a locker or cabinet. It looked older, meant for a chest, or a door that kept secrets. A tag was tied to it, just as with the first. In her handwriting, faded but strong, were 3 words: "For your courage." His breath caught. He turned the key over in his hand. It was cool, almost cold, even though it had rested in the box. He felt its weight settle into his palm, heavier than it should be. His wife had hidden not just her words, but a path for him to walk, a path she had carved through her illness, through her fear, so that even after she was gone, she could lead him. David sat there for a long time, listening to the silence of the music room. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. The boy practicing upstairs had stopped. The building seemed to wait with him. Finally, he placed the journals back into the box and closed the lid. He slipped the second key into the inner pocket of his jacket, next to the first. The two clinked together softly, like whispers. That night, after his shift ended, he carried the box home as though it were fragile glass. The streets were empty, the barber pole still and silent, the apartment dim. He set the box on the table, lit the lamp, and sat with the first journal open before him. Her words spilled into the room like light. She wrote of simple days, of watching him come home tired, of the way his smile still made her feel safe even when her body was failing. She wrote of fear, of nights she cried alone so he would not see, of her worry for him after she was gone. She wrote of how she saved, little by little, a few dollars tucked away, a secret account he never knew about, not for herself, but for him. "I could not give you riches," she had written, but I wanted to give you dignity. One day, when you are ready, you will find what I left. But more than money, I want you to find yourself again. The world will try to make you small. Promise me you will not let it." David wiped his eyes, the tears falling freely. He had promised her once, in a hospital room filled with the smell of antiseptic and fear. He had promised to keep living, but after she died, his promise had broken under the weight of emptiness. Now here she was, binding him back to it. The next day, he walked through the school with the second key heavy in his pocket. The laughter of the students echoed as always. A boy muttered, "Ghost janitor," under his breath. Two girls whispered and glanced at him as if he were a shadow. Normally, he would lower his head, let the words sink into his skin like thorns. But today, his fingers brushed the key, and instead of thorns, he felt steel. They did not know. They could not know. He carried something none of them could touch. At night, when the halls emptied, he searched. The key was too old for lockers, too ornate for cabinets. He tried it on the basement storage room. It rattled but did not turn. He tried the boiler room door. It scraped but refused. He even climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, where old theater props lay forgotten under dust sheets. The lock on the trap door to the upper storage was rusted, but the key would not fit. Frustration bit at him. He sat on a broken chair in the attic, the key heavy in his palm. "For your courage," the tag had said. Courage for what? He had been mocked, dismissed, ignored for years. What more courage could there be? And then, like a whisper, he remembered. Her words in the first letter, where music rests when it is out of breath. She had hidden the first key in the vent near the music room. If she had placed the second, it would be near music too, only not where it rests, but where it is performed. The stage. His heart raced as he descended the attic stairs, crossed the hall, and entered the auditorium. The stage stretched before him, wide and dark, the curtains heavy with dust. He had swept this place 1,000 times, yet never truly looked at it. He walked across the boards, the old wood creaking under his boots. At the back, behind the curtain, stood a trunk, large, wooden, bound with iron, forgotten for decades. He had always assumed it was full of broken props or costumes no one wanted. But now, as he knelt before it, he saw the lock. Brass, ornate, carved with swirls. His hands shook. He slid the key in. It fit. He closed his eyes, whispering her name. Then, with a trembling breath, he turned. The lock clicked open. The lock fell open with a dull metallic click that echoed through the empty auditorium. David froze. His hand trembled on the iron latch of the old trunk. For a moment, he did not breathe. 10 years of emptiness had led him to this second key, to this box, to this moment. Behind him, the stage curtains hung heavy and still, the shadows, gathering like an audience that had waited far too long. He lifted the lid. The hinges groaned, stiff from years of dust and silence. Inside lay stacks of journals, bundled letters, and a small pouch of coins so old they had gone dull with tarnish. The air smelled faintly of cedar, a ghost of preservation. On top of everything sat a notebook, wrapped in ribbon, with her handwriting, scrawled across the cover, "For when you are nearly lost." David's heart thumped hard. He picked up the notebook, the ribbon soft against his calloused fingers. He turned it over once, twice, then held it to his chest. Tears blurred his vision. She had known. She had known how grief would gnaw at him, how shame would eat at him. After her death, how he would feel invisible, sweeping halls no one cared about. She had known he would need these words not right away, not too soon, but later, when the weight threatened to crush him. But before he could open it, voices echoed. In the hall, David snapped the lid of the trunk shut. His heart jumped. The laughter of students drifted toward the stage, careless and cruel, the kind of laughter that thrived in empty places where it thought no one was listening. He shoved the notebook back into the trunk, closed the latch, and stepped away just as the auditorium doors burst open. 3 boys strode in, their sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. They were seniors, the type who believed the world was theirs by birthright. One bounced a basketball against the stage with a hollow thud. Another laughed and said, "Told you! He hides up here like some rat." They spotted him. Their grins widened. "Evening, ghost janitor," one sneered. "Practicing your big performance?" He mimed sweeping, exaggerated strokes that made the others howl with laughter. David's throat tightened. He wanted to walk away, to disappear into the curtains, but something in him resisted. His hand brushed his pocket where the key still lay, warm from his body. His wife's words whispered in his ear, "For your courage." He drew himself up. "Go. Home," he said quietly. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered. The boys blinked, surprised he had spoken. Then one laughed louder. "Did you hear that? He thinks he's in charge." The basketball smacked against the stage again. "What are you gonna do, mop us to death?" Their laughter cut sharp. Each word was a blade, reopening wounds he had carried for years. A teacher wandered in then, drawn by the noise. Mr. Fenton, the history teacher, tall and stern, always impatient. He frowned at the sight of David standing on the stage with the boys below. "What's going on here?" Fenton asked. Before David could answer, one boy said quickly, "He was snooping through the old props, sir, probably looking for something to steal." David's stomach twisted. "That's not true," he said, his voice cracking. But Fenton didn't look at him. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering. "You shouldn't be rummaging through school property," he said curtly. "Your job is to clean, not to poke around where you don't belong." The boys smirked. One whispered loud enough for David to hear, "Told you he's nothing but a janitor thief." Their laughter rang out again, cruel, merciless. Shame surged, hot in David's chest. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to shout, to tell Fenton about the letter, about the key, about his wife's handwriting carved into the lid of the trunk. He wanted to open it and show them, prove to them he wasn't rummaging, prove that something holy lived inside. But his voice failed. The words stuck, heavy as stones. "Get back to your work," Fenton said firmly. "Leave the storage to the staff who need it." David nodded once, his throat raw. He stepped down from the stage, past the boys who grinned. With victory, their eyes glittering with the satisfaction of having crushed a man smaller than them. He pushed his cart down the hall, each squeak of the wheels sounding like laughter behind him. That night, alone in his apartment, he sat with the unopened notebook on the table. He had slipped it into his jacket when no one was looking, terrified, but desperate. He stared at the ribbon. He could still hear the boys' taunts, still feel the teacher's cold dismissal. His chest ached with shame. For a moment, he nearly threw the notebook into the trash, telling himself they were right. He was nobody. But then he touched the ribbon, and her words from the first letter rose again. "Do not let the world make you small." His hands trembled as he untied the knot. He opened the first page, and there, in her voice, written for him alone, were the words that would change everything. The ribbon slipped free, curling on the table like a strand of hair, and David opened the notebook with trembling hands. The pages smelled faintly of lavender, the scent his wife used to keep in the drawers, as if the years had not stolen it completely. The first line drew his breath away. "If you are reading this, my love, it means you did not give up. It means you found the courage to search. That alone makes me proud." David closed his eyes. The ache in his chest swelled until he thought he might break apart. Her voice was in every letter, every curl of the ink. He traced the words with his rough fingertip, as if by doing so he could touch her hand across time. She wrote about the nights when illness kept her awake, and he slept beside her, unaware of her tears. She wrote about watching him work so hard, cleaning, repairing, always carrying the weight of silence. She feared, more than her own death, that he would lose himself once she was gone. "Promise me, David," the page read, "you will not let them convince you that you are invisible. You are the strongest man I know. You are not just a janitor. You are the keeper of moments, the quiet heart of every place you touch." He wiped his eyes and turned the page. In the following entries, she told him of small things she had hidden. A little savings she had managed to tuck away in secret, coins here and there, odd jobs she had done before her illness worsened. She confessed she had placed it where she knew he would never look, in a savings account under her maiden name. She gave him the account number, written carefully, and the name of the bank. "It is not much by the world's measure," she wrote, "but it is enough to start again, enough to lift you when you feel too heavy to stand. Promise me you will use it, not just for rent or food, but for life, for music, for dreams you buried when you thought no one cared." David's chest heaved. His wife had known the exact weight he carried, the way the world had pressed him flat. She had prepared not only words, but a future. He sat back in his chair, staring at the notebook, the key still heavy in his pocket. All the shame from the night before, Fenton's dismissal, the boys' laughter, their jeers of thief, still clung to him like wet clothes, but her words cut through it. "You are not invisible." He stayed up until dawn reading. Each page was another thread tying him back to her, weaving him into something whole again. She reminded him of nights they had danced in the kitchen with only the radio for music, of the way he made her laugh when she wanted to cry, of the quiet strength she saw in him, even when he thought himself weak. By the time the morning light crept through his curtains, David was weeping openly, not with the raw pain of grief, but with the bittersweet relief of being seen, even after death. She had seen him. She had believed in him. She had left him not just money, not just memories, but dignity. That evening, when he returned to the school, the halls seemed different. The same gum stains dotted the floor, the same lockers banged shut, the same cruel whispers brushed his ears. Yet they no longer pierced him as deeply. He carried her words now like armor. He swept the halls with quiet pride, each stroke of the broom steady. When a student muttered, "Ghost janitor," he lifted his head instead of lowering it. When two boys laughed at his old shoes, he ignored them, not with shame, but with something close to peace. During his break, he returned to the auditorium. The stage smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. He stood where the trunk had been, his hand brushing the edge of the curtains. For the first time in years, he did not feel small beneath the empty seats. He imagined her sitting in the front row, clapping, smiling. That night at home, he opened the notebook again. Near the back, she had written, "One day, David, you will be asked to stand where all can see you. Do not run. Do not hide. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Play, even if your hands tremble. That is how you keep me alive." Her words burned in him like fire. He closed the notebook and sat in silence, staring at the wall. He did not know when or how such a moment would come. He only knew that when it did, he would be ready. The next week, the town announced a small assembly at the school. Students would perform, teachers would speak, parents would attend. The principal asked staff to set up chairs and clean the auditorium. David volunteered without hesitation. On the night of the assembly, he worked quietly behind the scenes. But whispers spread. The story of the ghost janitor finding something in the school had circulated. Some said he had stolen treasure, others said he had uncovered secrets. Curiosity buzzed in the air. As the program ended, the principal, perhaps caught in the rumors, called David unexpectedly to the stage. "Mr. Miller," he said, "our custodian, would you like to say a few words?" The crowd turned, dozens of eyes fixed on him. David froze. His chest tightened. He remembered the boys' jeers, Fenton's dismissal. He wanted to step back, to refuse. But then he felt the notebook in his pocket, the weight of his wife's handwriting against his heart. "One day you will be asked to stand where all can see you." His legs carried him forward. He climbed the stage steps. His hands trembled, but he gripped the microphone. The hall waited. He took a breath, steady and deep. "My name is David," he began, his voice low but firm. "I clean these halls every night. Many of you have walked past me without seeing me. Some of you have laughed. Some of you have called me nothing." He paused. The silence deepened. "But I want to tell you something. Every life has worth. Every person carries a story you cannot see. My wife taught me that. Even in her last days, she believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself." He swallowed hard. His eyes swept the crowd. Some looked surprised, some guilty, some thoughtful. "Kindness costs nothing," he said softly, "but it can save someone's life. Cruelty leaves scars, and love lasts longer than death. That is what I've learned." He stepped back, his chest rising and falling. The auditorium was silent. Then, slowly, the clapping began. One parent stood, then another, until the hall echoed with applause. David lowered his head, tears filling his eyes. For the first time in 10 years, he felt tall. The applause from the assembly lingered in David's ears long after the chairs had been stacked and the lights dimmed. He walked home through the cool night air, his footsteps steady, the stars above sharp and clear. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter. The laughter of the boys, the whispers in the halls, the dismissal of the teachers, all of it seemed smaller now, swallowed by the echo of clapping hands and the memory of faces watching him not as a ghost, but as a man. In his apartment, he placed the notebook back in its box, smoothing the ribbon over it as if tucking it in for rest. He sat in silence, hands folded, listening to the hum of the old fridge and the faint creak of the building settling. Then he whispered, "They heard me. They finally heard me." He imagined his wife smiling, her eyes glowing the way they used, to when he surprised her with flowers after a long shift at the plant. The next morning at school, things felt different. The students still bustled, the lockers still slammed, and the hallways still smelled faintly of pencil shavings and floor wax. But when David pushed his cart down the hall, the same seniors who once mocked him now shifted uneasily, avoiding his eyes. Some even mumbled greetings. A girl from the debate team offered him a small smile. It was not much, but it was enough to remind him that words, his wife's words, his own words, had power. Still, not everyone changed. A few laughed behind his back, unwilling to see him as anything more than the janitor. But he no longer bent under their laughter. He carried the strength of the journals in his pocket and the fire of the assembly in his chest. Their cruelty could not erase what he now knew, that his worth had never depended on their eyes. Days turned into weeks. Each evening, he returned to the journals, reading page after page of his wife's careful handwriting. Some entries were playful, filled with small jokes only the two of them would understand. Others were raw, heavy with the fear of leaving him behind. In each, she left him a piece of her, stitching him back together word by word. In one of the final entries, she wrote, "If you are standing, it means you kept your promise. If you are reading this, it means you chose life over silence. And if you are smiling, even just a little, then I am with you still." David closed the book with trembling hands. He looked around his small apartment, the worn table, The cracked ceiling, the chair with its faded cushion. None of it was grand. None of it knew, but it was alive with her presence now. It was no longer empty. Word of his speech spread quietly through town. Parents spoke of it at the bakery. Teachers murmured about it in the lounge. A few days later, the principal approached him. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I've been thinking. The way you spoke at the assembly, it moved people. Would you consider saying a few words at the upcoming community night?" David hesitated. Public speaking had never been his dream. But he remembered his wife's words. "One day, you will be asked to stand where all can see you." He nodded. "Yes," he said simply. The night came. The community gathered in the gym, the same space where he had once swept confetti after games, where his name had been nothing but a shadow. Now he stood before them, holding no notes, only the memory of his wife's handwriting. He spoke not of himself, but of dignity, of kindness, of the quiet strength in unseen people. He told them how cruelty could crush a man and how a single act of compassion could lift him again. His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried. And when he finished, the crowd rose to their feet. From that day forward, David was no longer invisible. Some called him Mr. Miller with respect. Others began to greet him warmly. Even those who still whispered could not erase the change. He walked the halls taller, his shoulders straight, his eyes meeting those who passed. But the greatest change was not in them. It was in him. He no longer measured his worth by trophies in glass cases or by the careless words of boys in jackets. He measured it by the love of a woman who had seen him fully, by the promise he had kept to her, by the words he now carried forward. Years later, when David finally grew old and his hair turned silver, the journals still sat in the wooden box on his table. On quiet nights, he would open one and read aloud, his voice soft but strong, as though speaking to the air itself. And in those moments, he felt her beside him, not in the ache of absence, but in the warmth of presence. At the end of his life, people in Willow Creek remembered him not as the ghost janitor, but as the man who taught them that love endures, that dignity cannot be mocked away, and that words spoken from the heart can outlive even death. And when the last page of his story turned, the echo of his wife's voice lingered, carrying him across the silence, reminding him of the truth. She had written long ago, "You are not invisible. You are the heart of every place you walk." The end.